Daniel Harper stood on the bridge of his small ship, staring at the scanner in front of him. For 3 months, he and his crew had been mapping empty space, looking at dead stars and forgotten planets. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. His crew member, Maria, looked up from her station with wide eyes. She had found something strange on the sensors. There was a huge energy reading ahead of them, but it was very weak, like something sleeping. Daniel walked over to look at the data. The signature was not like anything in their records. It pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat. Whatever it was had been out here for a very long time. He ordered his pilot to take them closer, moving slowly and carefully. As they got near, their main screen showed them what was making the signal. It was a ship, but calling it just a ship did not feel right. The thing was massive, at least 50 times bigger than their vessel. Its design was strange, mixing smooth curves with sharp angles. The hull was black as space itself, with lines of dim energy running across it like frozen lightning. Jake, the engineer, whispered in amazement. He wanted to know how long this ship had been floating here. The outside showed no damage at all. There was no debris around it, nothing to explain why someone had left it behind. It just waited in the darkness as if it was sleeping. Daniel felt something pulling him toward the ship. He could not explain it, but he knew he needed to see inside. He told his security officer, Karen, to get a team ready. Within an hour, Daniel was in a spacesuit, walking on the hull of the mysterious vessel. The surface felt warm under his gloved hands, which should have been impossible in the cold of space. They found what looked like a door. The design was odd, covered in symbols that no one recognized. Daniel reached out to touch the panel next to it. The moment his hand made contact, everything changed. The symbols started to glow with soft blue light. The door opened with a sound of air moving. Even more surprising, the hallway beyond was lit up and his suit said there was air to breathe inside. Karen said this was impossible. The ship should be dead, but it was not dead. As they walked deeper inside, lights turned on ahead of them, as if the ship was waking up room by room. The hallways had strange architecture, with passages that curved and flowed instead of meeting at corners. Gravity plates turned on under their feet. They reached what must be the command center, a large room with a raised platform in the middle. Holographic displays surrounded the platform. In the center was a pedestal with a handprint pressed into its surface. Blue light pulsed from it, calling to Daniel. Karen warned him to be careful, but Daniel was already moving forward. He could not explain why, but he knew he had to touch it. He took off his glove and put his bare hand on the pedestal. The ship came to life. Energy rushed through every hallway, every system. The holographic displays lit up with information in hundreds of languages, changing until they found one Daniel could read. English. The ship had scanned him and changed to match. A voice filled the room, deep and strong, speaking directly into their minds. It said genetic match confirmed, human, authorization accepted. It called itself the Warden. It had been waiting for 3,000 cycles. Daniel pulled his hand back, still feeling tingling where he had touched the pedestal. He said he did not understand. The voice explained it had not been waiting for him personally, but for his species. The test left by the architects was clear. Only those who could create and destroy in equal measure could wake the ship. Only humanity carried that mix in their genes. The displays showed images of an ancient people called the Architects. They were beings of great power who had built the Warden as both a weapon and a protector. They had hidden it away, waiting for a species worthy of using it. A species that understood what power really meant. Daniel asked why humanity. The Warden answered because humans were dangerous. The galaxy needed something dangerous. A threat was coming that would eat all life if nothing stopped it. The Architects had seen this future. They made the Warden to be used when that moment came. That moment was now. Karen stepped forward and asked what kind of threat. The displays changed, showing images of space being torn apart, stars being consumed, whole civilizations falling into darkness. At the center of it all was something huge and hungry, something that existed between dimensions. The Warden called them the Devourers. They had been sleeping in the void between galaxies, but they were waking up. In 1 year, they would reach the outer edge of the galaxy. In 5 years, they would reach the core worlds. No known weapon could stop them. Daniel felt the weight of what he was hearing. His simple exploration mission had turned into something much bigger and much more frightening. Jake asked over the radio why the Warden would only respond to humans. The warden explained that the architects had studied many species across many galaxies. Most were too peaceful to use the ship well. Others were too aggressive and would have used it to conquer. Humans alone had the right balance. They created beauty and horror equally. They could be gentle and harsh, kind and practical. They were survivors who refused to give up, even when giving up made sense. Daniel looked at his team, seeing fear and doubt in their eyes. He felt it too. They were being asked to take control of the most powerful weapon in the galaxy and use it to fight something beyond their understanding. He asked what would happen if they refused. The warden said simply that the galaxy would die. It would go back to sleep, waiting for another species that would never come because there would be nothing left. Daniel took a deep breath. He thought of Earth, of the billions of people living their lives without knowing what was coming. He thought of all the other species in the galaxy, all the civilizations that would be erased if he walked away. He said they would accept. He told the warden to show them how to use it. The ship made a sound that seemed like satisfaction. It said the bond was made. It belonged to Daniel now. Together they would prepare for the coming storm. But it warned him that it was called the galaxy's most dangerous ship for a reason. It could destroy planets, break moons, collapse stars. With it, Daniel held the power of extinction. He had to use it wisely. As the ship fully woke around them, Daniel felt the responsibility settling on his shoulders. They had come looking for scientific discovery. Instead, they had found humanity's greatest test. The war for the galaxy's survival was about to begin, and somehow humans would be at the center of it. News of the discovery spread through human space like fire. Within days, many ships arrived where Daniel and his crew waited. Military vessels, science ships, and diplomatic craft from a dozen human colonies all came to see the warden. Daniel stood in the ship's meeting room, talking to Admiral Patricia Cole through a holographic screen. She was the head of Earth's combined fleet. Her face was stern, and her gray hair was pulled back tight. The Admiral told Daniel he needed to understand his position. Every major power in human space wanted control of the vessel. The Colonial Authority, the Free Stations, and the Outer Ring Alliance were all claiming they should have it. Daniel replied with respect that the warden did not answer to any government. It responded to human genes, but it had bonded with him specifically. He could not just hand over the controls. Jake looked up from where he was studying the ship's systems. He told the Admiral she did not understand. This ship was not just advanced technology. It was partly alive. It chose who could connect with it. Daniel's genetic signature was now coded into its main systems. The warden's voice filled the room. It confirmed what Jake said. The bond with Daniel could not be broken or transferred. This was how the architects designed it. Power had to rest with one person, not a group. Groups hesitate. Individuals act. Admiral Cole's jaw tightened. She said that was fine, but the political reality was that they needed oversight. If what they said about the Devourers was true, then humanity needed to work together. Maria spoke up. She had been watching communications from across the galaxy. She said they also needed to warn the other species. The big civilizations like the Confederated Worlds, the Zelthian Empire, and the Krill Consortium all needed to know what was coming. Karen said quietly that they would not believe humans. She had been reading historical records. Every time humanity tried to warn other species about dangers, they were dismissed as warmongers or primitives. Humans were the new species in the galaxy. Nobody trusted them. Daniel walked to the window looking at the gathered human ships. He asked the warden if there was any trace of the Devourer's approach they could show as evidence. The warden said there were warning signs. Several far systems had gone dark in the past 6 months. The civilizations there thought it was technical failures or natural disasters. But the warden could detect the signature of Devourer feeding. They consumed not just matter but energy, life force, even information. They left nothing but emptiness. Daniel asked if the warden could take them to one of these systems. The ship said yes, but warned that if the Devourers were still there, even the warden might not be able to protect them. It was powerful, but it was one vessel. The Devourers were many. Admiral Cole leaned forward in her hologram. She said if Daniel was going to investigate these dead systems, he would not go alone. She was assigning a task force to go with him. 12 ships with the best crews. If this was real, they needed to record everything. Over the next 3 days, preparations were made. The task force gathered, including cruisers, science vessels, and support ships. Daniel spent hours working with the Warden's systems, learning to connect with the ship's vast abilities. The learning was hard, but the Warden was patient, guiding him through each system. The Warden told Daniel he adapted quickly. Most species that tried to bond with similar vessels needed months of preparation. Daniel had learned the command systems in just hours. Daniel said he had been flying ships since he was a child. His father was a cargo hauler. He used to say that good pilots did not just operate their ships, they felt them. The Warden said that was a good observation. Their bond was partly emotional. The ship sensed his intentions and responded. In time, Daniel would not need to speak commands. The Warden would know what he needed. Jake appeared at the entrance to the command center. He said he had been studying the Warden's weapons. They were beyond anything humans had. The main cannon could generate enough energy to crack a planet's crust. The secondary systems included reality displacement weapons, quantum disruption fields, and something called a Starbreaker torpedo that he was almost afraid to test. Daniel said he hoped they would not have to use most of those. Jake continued, saying there was something else. The Warden had manufacturing abilities. It could make smaller vessels, drones, even copy technology. If they had time, they could upgrade the entire human fleet with advanced weapons. The Warden spoke up. It said such production would take years for a full fleet upgrade. They did not have years. However, it could make defense platforms and support craft. These would be necessary for the coming battle. Daniel said they would take it one step at a time.
First, they needed proof.
Then they needed allies. The task force left 3 days later with the Warden leading the group. The journey to the nearest dead system would take 2 weeks, even at maximum faster than light speeds. The system had been home to the Palaxi civilization. During the journey, Daniel took time to speak with his expanded crew. The Warden was large enough to house thousands. Volunteers from across human space had applied to serve on it. He chose carefully, picking people who understood what they were taking on. Gregory Nash became his second in command. He was a veteran of the colonial wars who had a reputation for staying calm under pressure. Lisa Monroe was the chief science officer, bringing knowledge of alien biology and quantum physics. Ryan Fletcher took over weapons, having trained with 3 different militaries. On the 10th day of travel, Maria picked up something on long-range sensors. She said she was detecting unusual readings ahead, energy changes in a pattern she had never seen before. Daniel asked the Warden for analysis. The ship confirmed they were devourer traces. The creatures had passed through this region about 3 months ago. The fabric of space and time showed evidence of feeding. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Palaxi system. What they found was horrible. The system's star still burned, but it was dimmer, as if something had drained away part of its energy. The planets were there, but they were gray and lifeless. Their surfaces were stripped of all organic matter and energy signatures. Lisa said in a hollow voice that there were 4 billion Palaxi living on the 3rd planet. This system was thriving 6 months ago. Now there was nothing. No structures, no technology, no life signs. It was like everything had been erased. Daniel felt cold fear in his stomach. He told them to record everything and send copies to every human colony and to all the major galactic powers. They needed to see this. As their scans continued, the Warden detected something else. There was a trace signature leading deeper into the galaxy. The Devourers had moved toward the core worlds after feeding here. Their path would take them through 17 inhabited systems before reaching the major civilizations. Gregory repeated quietly that 17 systems meant hundreds of billions of lives. The Warden added that was just the beginning. Once they reached the core, the feeding would speed up. They would grow stronger with each system they consumed. By the time they reached Earth, they would be unstoppable without major opposition. Daniel made his decision. He told them to send their findings to all channels. Make sure everyone in the galaxy saw what they found. Then plot a course for the nearest inhabited system in the Devourer's path. They were going to warn them in person. Karen warned that they might not listen. Daniel said firmly that they would make them listen. The Warden chose humanity for this task. That meant they had to step up whether they were ready or not. As the fleet prepared to leave, Daniel stood alone in the observation room, looking out at the dead system. Somewhere in the darkness, an enemy beyond understanding was coming, and somehow he and the Warden would have to find a way to stop it. The galaxy's most dangerous ship had woken up. Now it was time to prove whether humanity deserved to control it. The Zelthian Empire had existed for over 8,000 years. They were elegant beings made of crystal, whose understanding of physics and mathematics was the best in the galaxy. Their home system was a marvel, with huge rings around 3 planets and a swarm of collectors capturing energy from their binary stars. When the human fleet appeared at the edge of their system, the response was immediate. Dozens of Zelthian warships surrounded them within minutes. Their weapons were powered but not yet firing. A musical voice came through the communication system. It said this was Primarch Velquin of the Zelthian Defense Fleet. The humans were violating their border rules. State your purpose or be destroyed. Daniel took a breath before responding. The Zelthians were known for being formal and looking down on younger species. He said this was Captain Daniel Harper of the Human Vessel Warden. They came with urgent warning of a threat to all life in the galaxy. He requested an audience with their High Council. There was a long pause. Then the voice said humans did not command audiences with the High Council. Submit your data through proper diplomatic channels and leave their space. Daniel pressed on, saying they did not have time for proper channels. By the time the bureaucracy processed their request, millions of Zelthian people could be dead. He was sending their findings from the Palaxi system. Look at what happened there and tell him this could wait. Another pause, longer this time. Daniel imagined the Zelthian commanders reviewing the data, seeing the dead system, trying to decide if this was some elaborate human trick. Finally, Velquin responded. The data was disturbing. They would grant a limited audience, but the humans would be under heavy guard. Any aggressive action would result in immediate destruction. Was this acceptable? Daniel agreed completely. 6 hours later, Daniel stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of Zelthara Prime. The chamber was carved from a single massive crystal that broke light into thousands of colors. Around him were members of the High Council, 12 Zelthians whose crystalline bodies had taken on a deep purple color that showed their age and status. High Chancellor Moratel spoke, her voice like wind chimes. She said they had reviewed the findings. They were indeed concerning. However, they had questions about whether the data was real. The Palaxi system may have suffered a natural disaster. Lisa spoke up from beside Daniel. She had insisted on coming as the chief science officer. She said nothing natural strips a star of its energy. Their analysis showed quantum-level disruption that could only be caused by a massive directed feeding process. Another council member said that perhaps this was true. But the human species was young and impulsive. How did they know this was not a scheme to gain sympathy or resources? Humans had a reputation for conflict. Daniel felt frustration rising but kept his voice calm. He said they gained nothing from lying about this. The Devourers were following a path that would take them through 17 inhabited systems before reaching the core worlds. The third system in their path was Kelvareth, home to a Zelthian colony of 2 billion. That colony would be attacked in about 4 months if the Devourers kept their current pace. That got their attention. Moratel's crystalline features seemed to harden. She asked if he was certain of this path. Daniel confirmed it. The Warden had analyzed the energy signatures and the pattern of their movement. They were following lines of greatest energy density. Kelvareth was a rich system with significant stellar activity. It was exactly the kind of target they sought. Another council member spoke about the Warden vessel. Daniel claimed it was a weapon created by the architects. The architects were legend, possibly myth. How did they know the ship was what he claimed? Daniel had been expecting this. He asked the Warden to please demonstrate its abilities. Something impressive but not threatening. The Warden's presence filled the chamber, its voice making the crystal walls vibrate. It said as Daniel wished. Outside the hall, visible through the massive crystal windows, space itself began to ripple. The Warden created a localized field of warped space and time, folding dimensions in a way that made their 3 moons appear to occupy the same position at once. It was a show of power that should have been impossible, a manipulation of reality itself. The Zelthian council members stood in shocked silence. Such casual manipulation of space and time was beyond even their most advanced theories. The Warden continued, saying the architects did exist. It was their legacy, created for this purpose. The Devourers were ancient enemies of all life. They had destroyed galaxies before. This galaxy was next unless they acted. Moratel slowly returned to her seat. If what they said was true, then they faced a threat unlike any in their history. But the Zelthian Empire could not commit to war based on one species' warning, even with such a demonstration. They needed consensus from the Galactic Forum. Daniel urged her to help them get that consensus. Use their influence. The Zelthian Empire was respected. If they called for an emergency session of the Forum, others would listen. The High Chancellor considered this. She said they would call the session, but Daniel should understand that many species feared humans. They were aggressive, unpredictable, and they had this impossibly powerful vessel under their control. Some would wonder if the real threat was humanity. Daniel said he understood, but he would rather deal with political suspicion than watch civilizations die because they were too afraid to act. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Forum met in the neutral space of the Concordance Station. It was a massive structure that orbited no star and belonged to no single species. Representatives from 47 major civilizations gathered, along with hundreds of observers and diplomatic staff. Daniel stood before them, feeling very small and very human. The warden waited outside the station, too large to dock. Its presence was a constant reminder of both hope and fear. He told them everything. He showed them the data from the Palaxi system. He presented the warden's projections of the Devourer's path. He explained what would happen if they did nothing. The response was mixed. Some species, like the Zelthians and the peaceful Krell Collective, urged immediate action. Others, like the militaristic Drogath hegemony, accused humans of making up a crisis to gain power. The representative from the Vosk trade union wanted to know how this would affect commercial shipping routes, but it was the representative from the Krill Consortium, Ambassador Takrin, whose words cut deepest. The Krill were an old species. Their insect-like forms had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Takrin spoke, their translation device making their speech cold and precise. They said humans arrive with a weapon of immeasurable power and ask everyone to follow them into war against an enemy most had never heard of. Could they not see how this appeared? Humans could be conquering the galaxy using fear as their weapon. Daniel felt anger flash through him but pushed it down. He asked what they would gain from that. If they wanted to conquer, they would simply attack. Instead, they were here, asking for cooperation, warning of a real threat. Takrin countered that humans might be clever enough to know that open aggression would unite the galaxy against them, whereas a phantom threat allows them to position themselves as saviors, while everyone grows dependent on their terrible ship. The chamber erupted in debate. Daniel watched as the forum split into groups, some believing, some skeptical, others openly hostile to human involvement. Then the emergency alerts began sounding. The station's computer announced they were receiving distress calls from the Kelvareth system. The signals were broken but indicated a massive, unknown hostile force. Contact was lost 3 minutes ago. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Daniel, and he felt the weight of their stares. The Devourers had arrived early, speeding up their timeline. Kelvareth, with its 2 billion Zelthian colonists, was under attack right now. Velquin stood from the Zelthian delegation. His crystalline features showed something that might have been horror. He said Kelvareth was his home. His family was there. Daniel did not wait for permission from the forum. He told the warden to plot course for Kelvareth at maximum speed. He ordered the task force to form up on his position. Someone protested that he could not leave the session. Daniel was already moving toward the exit. He said they wanted proof and they were about to get it. Any ship that wanted to help was welcome to follow. Those that wanted to debate could stay, but he was not letting 2 billion people die while they argued about politics. As he ran to his shuttle, Gregory's voice came through his communicator. The Zelthian defense fleet was mobilizing. They were asking if they could coordinate with the humans. Daniel told him yes and tell them they were not leaving anyone behind. The warden had been built for this moment. Now it was time to see if the galaxy's most dangerous ship could live up to its name. The battle for the galaxy's survival had begun, and humanity stood at the center of the storm. The warden dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kelvareth system. Daniel immediately understood why the architects had feared the Devourers. The system was being consumed by something that broke every law of physics he understood. Space itself was torn open in dozens of places. Through those wounds poured the Devourers. They were not ships in any normal sense. They were massive, shapeless things that seemed to exist partly in normal space and partly in other dimensions. They pulsed with sick purple-black energy. Wherever they moved, reality itself seemed to decay. Lisa whispered in shock that they were eating the star. She was right. The system's primary sun was visibly getting dimmer. Streams of plasma and energy were being pulled into the nearest devourer like water down a drain. The planets were under assault. Their atmospheres were being stripped away. Their surfaces already showed the gray death that Daniel had seen in the Palaxi system. Gregory asked how many there were. Maria reported she was scanning now. She counted 37 distinct entities. No, wait, more were emerging. They were using the largest one as an anchor to pull through from wherever they came from. Daniel asked the warden if they could fight them. The ship said it was unknown. It admitted with something that might have been uncertainty that it was designed to combat the Devourers but had never actually fought them. The architects completed its construction after the last invasion had been stopped. It was theory that must now become practice. The Zelthian defense fleet arrived moments later. 100 gleaming ships immediately formed up behind the warden. Admiral Velquin's face appeared on the display. His crystalline features were set with grim determination. He asked Daniel what his orders were. The question startled Daniel. The Zelthians were renowned warriors, yet their admiral was asking a human for commands. Daniel asked if Velquin was putting him in charge. The Zelthian said simply that the warden responded to Daniel, and he had seen enough to know that normal tactics would not work here. They needed something new. They needed someone willing to take risks. That was what humans did best, was it not? Daniel felt the weight of command settling on him like a physical thing. Behind the Zelthian fleet, he could see other ships arriving. The Krell Collective had sent their defense force. 3 Drogath warships appeared, their commander apparently deciding that whatever his government's political stance, this was a fight worth joining. Even the cautious Vosk had sent a small squadron. Daniel broadcast on all channels. He said this was Captain Harper. The Devourers were feeding on this system. If they let them finish, they would grow stronger and move on to the next target. They had to stop them here. He asked the warden what it recommended. The warden's tactical display came to life, showing the positions of all enemy units. It said the Devourers were anchored to the largest entity. It served as a dimensional gateway. If they could destroy or disable it, they could cut off reinforcements. However, it was the most heavily defended. Ryan muttered from the weapons station that of course it was. The warden continued, saying the Devourer's feeding process could be disrupted by quantum dissonance. Its weapons were designed to generate such dissonance. However, it could not engage all targets at once. It would need support to protect its flanks while it focused on the anchor. Daniel studied the tactical situation. The enemy forces formed a loose sphere around the system's inner planets. The anchor entity was at the center, positioned near the dying star. He explained the plan. The warden would drive straight for the anchor. All fleet elements would form a protective screen. When the Devourers moved to intercept them, and they would hit them with everything. The goal was to buy the warden enough time to close distance with the anchor and destroy it. One of the Drogath commanders growled that this was the plan. A frontal assault? Daniel challenged him, asking if he had a better idea. There was silence on the channel. Daniel continued, saying they were not trying to kill all of them. Just the anchor. Once their reinforcements were cut off, they could deal with the remaining entities. He ordered Velquin to take his fastest ships and draw off the outer picket. The Drogath forces would position on the flanks as heavy hitters. The Krell and Vosk would guard the rear and watch for any enemies trying to flank them. Orders were acknowledged. The fleet formed up. The warden accelerated toward the enemy formation. Its vast bulk moved with surprising grace. The Allied ships spread out around it like an escort of small fish protecting a whale. The Devourers noticed them immediately. The entities on the outer edge of their formation turned, flowing through space in defiance of inertia. They moved like living things, tentacles of dark energy reaching out across millions of kilometers. Karen announced they were coming. 50 seconds to weapons range. Daniel ordered all ships to hold fire until his command. He told the warden to power up its primary weapon and target the anchor. The warden confirmed it was charging. Time to full charge would be 90 seconds. The first Devourer reached weapons range and lashed out with a beam of entropy energy. It struck a Zelthian cruiser. Daniel watched in horror as the ship's hull began to age rapidly, corroding and failing in seconds. The cruiser broke apart, its crew lost. Daniel commanded all ships to fire at will. The combined fleet opened up and space lit up with weapons fire. Missiles, particle beams, plasma torpedoes, and exotic weapons Daniel had never seen before all hammered into the Devourers. Some attacks seemed to hurt them, causing the entities to writhe and retreat. Others passed through them as if they were not entirely solid. Lisa reported they were phasing between dimensions. They could avoid attacks by shifting their dimensional alignment. Daniel asked if the warden could compensate. The ship replied it was already adjusting. It was learning their phase patterns, firing solutions updated. It told all allied ships to synchronize their weapons to its frequency. The warden broadcast a modulation pattern to the fleet. Ships that could adapt their weapons did so. Suddenly their attacks became more effective. The Devourers could not simply phase away anymore, but there were so many of them. For every one they damaged, 2 more pressed in. A Krell frigate vanished as a Devourer engulfed it completely. One of the Drogath warships lost its engines and began to drift, immediately becoming prey for the hungry entities. The warden announced 60 seconds to primary weapon discharge. They were halfway to the anchor now and the fighting was intense. The Zelthian fleet was suffering heavy casualties, but Velquin held his formation steady. Daniel saw one Zelthian captain deliberately ram his damaged ship into a Devourer. The explosion created a brief gap in the enemy line. Daniel ordered all power to forward shields. They were going to punch through. The warden's shields flared as it absorbed hit after hit. Warnings blared across the bridge as systems began to strain under the assault. But the ancient ship held. Its architect-designed hull resisted energies that would have destroyed any normal vessel. The warden said 30 seconds. A Devourer loomed in front of them, massive even compared to the warden. It spread itself wide, tentacles extending to block their path. Daniel did not hesitate. He ordered ram speed and told the warden to go through it. The ship confirmed, and if a ship could sound eager, it did. They hit the Devourer at full speed. The entity tried to phase away but was not fast enough. The warden's hull, protected by shields operating on principles the Devourers had not encountered before, tore through the creature. It shrieked across all dimensions as it was ripped apart. Maria reported clear path to the anchor. 10 seconds to firing position. The anchor entity seemed to realize the danger. It pulled itself away from the star, leaving the dying sun dimmer but still intact. Smaller Devourers swarmed around it, creating a living shield. Daniel commanded fire. The warden's primary weapon discharged, and reality itself seemed to scream. The beam that erupted from the ship was not made of light or particles, but of pure quantum disruption. It unmade things at a fundamental level, breaking the bonds that held matter, energy, and even space-time together. The beam punched through the protective Devourers like they were not there. It struck the anchor entity dead center, and the effect was catastrophic. The anchor began to collapse in on itself. Its dimensional gateway was destabilizing. Devourers still emerging from the portal were caught in the collapse, torn apart by the forces they had been using to enter this reality. The warden said secondary charges were ready and asked permission to fire. Daniel told it to fire everything. 6 more weapons discharged, each one striking the anchor from a different angle. The entity could not withstand the assault. With a pulse of energy that registered across every sensor in the system, it died. The effect on the other Devourers was immediate. Without the anchor, they began to destabilize. Some tried to retreat, phasing back to wherever they came from. Others simply collapsed, their connection to their home dimension severed. Daniel ordered all ships to pursue and destroy the remaining enemies. Do not let any escape. The battle had turned into a rout. The Allied fleet, battered but victorious, hunted down the remaining Devourers one by one. It took 4 hours to clear the system completely. By the end, Daniel's hands were shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Gregory reported quietly the final count. 3 months after the Battle of Kelvareth, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Galactic Forum had undergone the most significant changes in its 4,000-year history. Species that had barely talked to each other were now sharing technology, resources, and military strategies. The threat of the Devourers had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It forced the galaxy to work together. Daniel stood in the newly established War Council chamber. It was a massive room on the Concordance station that had been fitted with holographic displays showing the entire galaxy. Red markers showed dead systems. Yellow markers showed systems under threat. Blue markers showed defensive positions. There were not nearly enough blue markers. Lisa reported to the assembled representatives that the latest intelligence suggested the Devourers were regrouping in the Veil Nebula. They were drawing in more of their kind from beyond the galaxy. Estimates suggested they would attack in force within 6 months, hitting multiple systems at the same time. Chancellor Moratel asked how they could stop an attack on that scale. The Zelthian leader had become one of humanity's strongest supporters after the Battle of Kelvareth. Daniel said they would build a defense network. He highlighted several strategic points on the galactic map. The Warden had been making defense platforms and auxiliary vessels. They now had 47 Warden-class defensive stations positioned at key points along the most likely attack routes. Each station was equipped with quantum disruption weapons modeled after the Warden's primary weapon. Commander Drakthar of the Drogoth hegemony growled that it was not enough. The warrior species had thrown their considerable military might behind the defense effort. They needed more ships, more weapons, more of everything. Jake said they were working on it. The engineer had been coordinating with scientists from 24 species, reverse engineering architect technology, and integrating it with existing weapon systems. Every major shipyard in the galaxy was running at maximum capacity. They had managed to retrofit about 30% of the combined fleet with quantum-capable weapons. The rest were being equipped with at least some defensive measures against the Devourer's entropy attacks. Ambassador Takrian of the Krill Consortium clicked thoughtfully. The insect-like diplomat who had once accused humans of making up the crisis was now one of their most trusted allies. The problem remained that they were reactive. They responded to threats but did not anticipate them. They needed better intelligence on the Devourer's movements and capabilities. Maria said they were working on that too. She had been promoted to lead the Council's intelligence division. The Warden had deployed sensor networks throughout the galaxy. They were monitoring dimensional anomalies, energy signatures, anything that might indicate Devourer activity. But they were smart. They had learned to mask their approach. Daniel studied the map, his mind racing through possibilities. Over the past months, he had changed. The weight of command, the responsibility for billions of lives, had transformed him from an exploration captain into something more. The Warden's bond had deepened too. Sometimes he could feel the ship's thoughts as clearly as his own, their consciousness merging at the edges. Daniel said suddenly that they needed to take the fight to them. The room fell silent. Velquin leaned forward and asked him to explain. Daniel gestured to the map. He said to look at the pattern. Every time they attacked, they established an anchor point and fed until they were driven off or their anchor was destroyed. They were treating this galaxy like a buffet, picking off systems one at a time. But what if they stopped waiting for them to come? What if they attacked their staging area in the Veil Nebula? Drakthar objected that it would be suicide. They barely survived Kelvareth, and that was against a fraction of their forces. If they attacked their main concentration, they would be overwhelmed. Daniel countered that not if they were smart about it. The Warden had been analyzing the Devourer's behavior. They were not mindless. They had a hierarchy, a command structure. If they could identify and eliminate their leadership, they might be able to throw their entire invasion into chaos. Lisa looked skeptical. She asked about leadership. They did not even know if the Devourers were intelligent in a way they would recognize. They might be more like a virus or a natural phenomenon than a sentient species. The Warden's voice filled the chamber. The ship's consciousness had been given permission to participate directly in council meetings. It said they were intelligent. The architects discovered this in their war. The Devourers had what might be called queens, prime entities that coordinated the others. They were ancient, powerful, and cunning, but they were also vulnerable if one could reach them. Moratel asked if they thought they could reach one. The Warden confirmed it knew where one was. It had been tracking dimensional signatures. There was a prime entity in the Veil Nebula, coordinating the gathering forces. It was preparing for the next major offensive. If they struck now before they were ready, they might be able to kill it. The debate that followed lasted hours. The risks were enormous. They would be taking their most powerful assets, the Warden and the best ships of the combined fleet, deep into enemy territory. If they failed, the galaxy's defenses would be crippled. But if they succeeded, they might buy the time needed to complete the defensive preparations. They might even discourage the Devourers from continuing their assault. In the end, it was Velquin who made the argument that tipped the balance. He said Daniel was correct. They could not win this war by defense alone. At some point, they had to show the Devourers that they were not prey to be consumed at leisure. They had to show them that this galaxy had teeth. The vote was close, but the decision was made. Strike Force Unity, as it came to be called, would launch in 2 weeks. It would consist of the Warden, 500 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, and crews that represented every major civilization. Humans would lead, but this would be a truly galactic effort. The 2 weeks of preparation were intense. Daniel barely slept, coordinating with fleet commanders, reviewing attack plans, and working with the Warden to devise strategies for dealing with the Prime entity. The Warden had fought such creatures before, in simulations and tests, but never in actual combat. Daniel asked the Warden one night if it was afraid. They were alone on the observation deck. The ship admitted that it was. It was created for this purpose, but creation and execution were different things. It feared it would fail Daniel, fail the galaxy that depended on them. Daniel said quietly that he knew the feeling. He was just an exploration captain. He was supposed to chart dead systems and study anomalies. Instead, he was leading the largest military operation in galactic history. Sometimes he thought there was a mistake, that the architect's test should have chosen someone else. The Warden said firmly there was no mistake. It had bonded with Daniel deeply enough to know his character. He doubted himself, which meant he understood the weight of his decisions. He feared failure, which meant he understood what was at stake. These qualities made him worthy. A leader who felt no doubt or fear was a danger to those they led. On the day of departure, Daniel stood before Strike Force Unity and gave a speech that would be remembered for generations. He spoke of courage and sacrifice, of the need to protect not just their own species but all life in the galaxy. He reminded them that they fought not for glory or territory, but for the simple right of civilizations to exist. Daniel concluded by saying the Devourers thought they were prey. They thought they could consume their worlds and their lives without consequence. Today they would show them they were wrong. Today, they would show them that this galaxy was worth fighting for, and if they had to become as dangerous as the galaxy's most dangerous ship to protect it, then that was what they would be. The fleet departed in a coordinated jump, dozens of faster-than-light signatures flaring at once. They traveled in silence, keeping communication blackout to avoid alerting the enemy. The journey to the Veil Nebula took 3 days, and with each passing hour the tension mounted. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the nebula. Immediately they understood the scale of what they faced. The nebula was filled with Devourers, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. They swarmed around a massive entity at the center, something so large it made even the Warden look small. Lisa confirmed in barely a whisper that it was the Prime. The Prime entity was a nightmare made real. It existed partially in multiple dimensions at once, its form shifting and flowing in ways that hurt to look at. Streams of energy flowed into it from the surrounding Devourers, feeding it, strengthening it. Ryan observed that it was absorbing power from the others. It was preparing for something big. The Warden said it was the final assault. The Prime was gathering its forces for a simultaneous attack on 50 systems. It would coordinate the offensive personally. Daniel said then they were just in time. He asked all ships to take attack formation. He asked the Warden if it could reach the Prime. The ship said if the fleet could clear a path, yes. But it warned Daniel that fighting the Prime would require it to channel more power than it had ever used before. There was a risk it could destroy itself in the process. Daniel asked if it would do it anyway. The Warden replied, of course.